Luke Crain is the youngest of the Crain siblings, only older than Nell by 90 seconds. Yet in many ways, he is treated as the youngest child. As a child, Luke spends most of his time drawing with his crayons, playing in the treehouse, and exploring the house with Nell. As a child, he is seen wearing rather large and thick glasses, which gives him a starry-eyed look. This seems to suit his personality well. Out of all the children, Luke seems to be the most innocent and sweet. Luke is very adventurous and quite inquisitive, which gets him into trouble with Carla Dudley. When he is scolded by Carla for playing in the dumbwaiter, he later returns in secret to play with it again at night. He seems to be very creative and an imaginative child, which leads to his family disregarding a lot of things that he says. Sadly, his family keeps insisting that some of the most fantastical things he experiences at Hill House are pure fiction. This is pretty tragic because he often tells the truth, yet instead of being rewarded for it, he is often dismissed. So in many ways, truth and fiction come to hold the same weight, at times becoming hard to distinguish. When the family is clearing out the room with the spiral staircase, they find an old bowler hat. Luke becomes fascinated with it and asks if he can have it. Olivia says it might be too big for him, but Hue says that he will grow into it. Hue tells Luke that it is a big boy hat, all right. You want this? Well, you're a big boy now. But you know, big boys, they know the difference between what's real and what's imaginary. So what do you say, champ? Luke nods his head, and Hugh places the bowler hat on Luke's head. It is clearly too large, which prompts some laughter from Olivia and Hugh. Nell says he loves it. When Hugh asks how she knows, she replies, it's a twin thing. This nice little family scene has some very insightful key symbolism and themes. The bowler hat becomes a symbol of reality and imagination. This has become one of Luke's main defining themes on the show. Being twins, Nell and Luke share a very special bond. Nell can often experience or know what Luke is thinking, like when Nell is able to tell that Luke likes the bowler hat. Luke is also woken when Nell is scared by the vision of the bent-neck lady. As Nell is silently crying in bed, she is surprised that Luke was also awake. His simple response is, well, yeah, 'cause you're awake. He goes to comfort Nell and is the only one to believe her that the bent-neck lady is real. He also shows Nell a way to keep them safe. He tells her to count the 7 buttons, 7 for each of the cranes. He tells her to count out loud, and sometimes you gotta do it a lot. This becomes a coping mechanism for the twins. Even as adults, both Nell and Luke use this way to calm themselves down. They also share the same emotions. When the twins hear the strange voice from the speaking tube, Nell remarks that Luke is scared. When Luke denies it, she says, I can tell. He asks her how she can tell, to which she replies, because I'm scared. Luke and Nell sharing a special connection due to their twin thing is also a sad and grim foreshadow of things to come. Out of all the siblings, the trauma of Hill House seems to affect the twins the most, and it leads them down dark paths. Their falling out due to Nell's declining mental health and Luke's drug addiction ultimately leaves both of them isolated from their families, and especially vulnerable to Hill House's machinations. As adults, they often feel each other's pain. Nell experiences Luke's withdrawal symptoms and pain when he broke his foot. A more morbid and grim example is when Nell dies. All the siblings experience the neck snapping sensation, but Luke experiences the pain to a higher degree, and it seems to continue to bother him. He also starts to suffer from what seems like withdrawal symptoms even though he is clean. What he is probably experiencing is Nell's cold, dead body. In the show, it is hinted that the Crain women are connected to the supernatural, or at the very least, all display some clairvoyant abilities. Luke Carver seems to have some abilities as well, but perhaps to a lesser extent. When the twins and Theo investigate the mysterious speaking tube in the kitchen, they find that it leads to an old sickbed. Luke remarks on the strange smell in the room. Theo says it smells the same as the rest of the house. It is hinted that this might be Luke picking up on the smell of what was once the sick room. Again, with the speaking tube, both Nell and Luke hear a strange voice coming from the tube. An old woman's voice calls out, asking for Clara. This is explained later to be Hazel Hill's voice. Hazel used to live at Hill House and was taken care of by Clara Dudley. Luke comes into multiple contacts with a lot of different ghosts during his time living at Hill House. His first minor contact is with Hazel Hill. When Luke goes to investigate the other side of the speaking tube, he sees and hears Hazel. Her reflection can be seen on the horn's surface, and her voice calling out for Clara is loud. He runs away terrified, but is otherwise unharmed. His first major and more frightening encounter is with the burnt ghost in the basement. When he manages to convince Theo to send him up the dumbwaiter, it instead leads him down to a secret basement. Terrified, alone, and stuck in the dumbwaiter, Luke starts to panic and asks Theo for help. Out of the darkness, a shambling broken body crawls on the ground from behind some crates. It appears to be a dead, burnt man who proceeds to drag his own body towards Luke. We don't exactly get to see what happens next, but Luke is rescued from the dumbwaiter by Hugh and Olivia. His shirt pocket has been torn, and Luke is visibly shaken. He is later haunted by William Hill. William was Poppy Hill's husband. They were described by Clara Dudley to be medically insane. Later in the show, it is shown that William had apparently bricked himself into one of the basement's walls. His ghost appears as a tall, floating man with a walking cane. One night, Luke is woken by the noise of the taps made by William's cane. Luke goes to investigate the noise, only to find the horrifying ghost of William Hill roaming the hallway. William is seen to be checking the rooms, seemingly looking for his hat, the hat that Luke asked to keep. The terrified Luke hides under his bed as William searches the twins' room. William's shadow is lit by moonlight. It shows him searching the room and finding the hat near Luke's bed. William places the hat on his head and appears to start to leave. Luke involuntarily lets out his breath, which alerts William to his hiding spot. William reaches down after him, and Luke lets out a terrified scream, and the scene ends. Luke is the first of the Crains that seems to understand that Hill House is bad and dangerous. When he tries to warn Hugh that the burnt man in the basement was real, he says something interesting. Luke says, "This house is bad, Dad. It's bad." A part of him seems to know that the house itself is wrong and off. The other Crane senses things, but they don't seem to pick up on this issue. His friendship with Abigail is also dismissed as being completely imaginary. This dismissal leads to a very dark fate for Abigail, who is very much a real person. Abigail Dudley lives across the woods from Hill House. Her mother is Clara Dudley, who forbade Abigail from coming to Hill House. Of course, similar to Luke, Abigail is a young, inquisitive child who was very lonesome. So when she saw Luke one day, she decided to secretly come to Hill House to play with him. Despite Luke's constant talk about Abigail, no one believes that she's real. They think that she's an imaginary friend, and gets rather annoyed when he keeps bringing her up. Luke as a child was often dismissed, and no one ever truly listened to him, except his sister Nell. This will take a huge toll on him, and it will greatly affect his adult life. The death of his childhood friend Abigail also comes to mean an end to Luke's innocence. And in his mind she becomes an imaginary person, again blurring truth and imagination. Luke's treehouse is also rather telling. Out of all the Crains, he has the most different version of his personal red room. It is an impossibly large treehouse, complete with a red trap door. This reflects his creative, playful mind and his childhood innocence. As an adult, Luke has lost his innocence. It should be noted that he no longer wears his glasses and no longer has his starry eyes. His life has completely been derailed by his addiction to drugs. He uses drugs as a coping mechanism to escape his fears and traumas, but it only compounds his issues. His addiction has greatly damaged his familial relationships. Shirley is completely fed up with him and all his stints in rehab. While she has been very supportive with him over the years, she has come to her wits' end. She has been financially supporting him and housed him at one point, but he continually fails his recovery. Luke has stolen from Steve on multiple occasions to fund his addiction, and Steve seems to have lost all hope of Luke ever recovering. When Luke brings Joey over to Steve's home to celebrate his 30-day sobriety, the celebration ends bitterly when Steve disapproves of Joey. When Luke asks why Steve couldn't give Joey a chance, Steve responds that he had given them all to Luke. Luke and Theo's relationship as adults isn't really seen on the show, but Theo says to Shirley about Luke. Luke will show up when he needs money. Shirley remarks that she's scared that she'll never see Luke again, and if she does, it'll be the last time. To which Theo responds, boundaries, maybe a brick wall when it comes to Luke. He has also completely become estranged to Hue. When talking to Joey, he calls Hue my asshole of a father. Saddest of all, he really let Nell down in her time of need. Not only did he miss her wedding because he was busy getting high, he later completely failed to be there for her when she needed him most. When Arthur had just passed, and Nell was left vulnerable and sad, she tries to confide in Luke and picks him up to drop him off at another rehab center. As she opens up to him about how she has been struggling, it is clear that he really isn't listening to her. He is preoccupied with trying to get high again before he goes to rehab. He even resorts to guilt-tripping her, using her childhood trauma about the bent-necked lady. He says that he is the only one who believed her when they were children, and uses their shared bond to score some drugs. While Luke has lost his innocence, he is still rather naive. At Luke's 90-day sobriety speech, he tells his sad story about losing his mother at such a young age. As a boy, he still expected his mother to one day return. At that age, he has yet to grasp the permanence of death. He would wait up at night, looking for headlights of a car, expecting at any moment that a car would finally stop and Olivia would step out and take him home. In many ways, it seems like he is still waiting for Olivia to come home. Luke is stuck in limbo, unable to move on with his life the same way his siblings have. The events of Hill House have really put him in a state of arrested development. Like Luke says in his speech, Olivia never did return, but the ghosts of Hill House did, and whenever they appeared, he would use drugs. It appears his 90-day milestone is due to his new support system he has formed at his current rehab center. He develops a strong relationship with a fellow addict, Joey. She was there for him and mentored him during his recovery, and he seems to feel a deep sense of camaraderie with her. His addiction has created a huge chasm that separates him from his family. Joey becomes the only person in his life that he feels understands him because of their shared experience as addicts. But like his counselor Paige warns him, we can start to hang our recovery on someone else instead of ourselves. Joey decides to leave rehab unexpectedly, and Luke refuses to abandon her. He decides to escape from rehab to go to find her. Luke does what Paige has warned him against doing. He comes to believe that Joey will be able to overcome her addiction, and if she can do it, then so can he. Luke wanders the streets and visits Joey's old haunts. He does manage to find her by nighttime. She is high, and she immediately breaks down when she sees him. He tries to console her and tries to get her back on the path to recovery. He calls Paige to see if they would be able to come back to the drug center, but Paige declines his request. This leaves a desperate Luke to visit Steve's house. Unbeknownst to him, Steve and Lee are separated and Steve is out of town. Growing more and more desperate in his attempt to rescue Joey, he decides to break into Steve's apartment. He steals some things so that he would be able to afford a hotel where Joey can come down from her drugs in a safe place. Unfortunately for him, he runs into Steve in the apartment lobby. With great shame and defeat, Luke tries to explain to Steve that it really isn't what it looks like. But of course, Steve doesn't believe him. An obviously tired and exacerbated Steve trades $200 for the iPad and gives Luke the camera. This is the side of Luke that the family sees the most. The stealing, manipulative Luke, so it is understandable why they choose to distance themselves from him. Leaving Steve's apartment, Luke continues with Joey in hopes of getting a hotel. Joey stops Luke abruptly for a bathroom break. Before she heads off into the alley, she kisses him, which leaves him confused but seemingly happy. Unfortunately, she was just trying to distract him so she could pickpocket the money. She disappears down the alley, leaving Luke alone. This is very reminiscent of his own behavior with Nell, when he manipulates his twin into buying him drugs. As the night gets cold, Luke is left on the streets with no money and no place to go. Things get worse when he is jumped by a group of thugs who takes his shoes and his jackets. He is left bruised, penniless, cold, and alone. Luckily, he's able to call Paige for help. Unfortunately, he starts to see William Hill again. But this time, it's a little bit different. William Hill isn't seen from the front, but has his back turned to Luke. This creates a strange visage of a tall man in a trench coat and a bowler hat, ominously looming behind him. William continues to follow Luke, and Luke tries to calm himself down using his counting ritual. This, however, is futile, and William appears to follow him closer and closer. Luke decides to look, and to his surprise, it isn't William, but Olivia in the bowler hat. His mother has finally returned to him. She tells him to come home, and as she opens her eyes, headlights shine out of her eyes to blind him. The light transitions into the car's headlights. Paige and Steve exits the car. Steve and Luke embrace as Luke laments that he couldn't save Joey. He keeps saying that he feels cold, like when he is in withdrawal, but he hasn't used drugs, so it can't be withdrawal symptoms. He wants Steve to believe him, but is cut short with Steve's news of Nell's death. Steve tells Luke that it was suicide, to which Luke replies, "No, Stevie, it wasn't." There's so much to unpack in this short scene. Like he did as a child, Luke is still waiting for Olivia to come and bring him home. The bowler hat, or Luke's big boy hat, is now being worn by Olivia instead of William. Olivia is now the main ghost that will haunt Luke, beckoning him to come home. The hat will also come to symbolize what I will call an awakening. The awakening is something that most victims of Hill House experiences. Both Olivia and Nell experience a strong sense of what can be described as wakeful dreams. They start to lose themselves in this dream, and they become more and more detached to their wakeful self. What ultimately pushes Nell and Olivia to the ledge of the spiral staircase is the urge to wake up. Being alive has become a dream, and death is to awaken. The realities of everyday life, the nightmarish world of the ghoulish ghosts, and the wonderful dreams of those trapped by the house all blend to form a strange reality that somehow is being generated by Hill House. The bowler hat is also greatly tied to Luke's sense of being a big boy. And like Hue says, a big boy can tell the difference between imagination and reality. The visage of Olivia in the bowler hat and headlight eyes symbolizes Luke's deepest desires, his mother returning to take him home where he can grow up into a big boy. During his eulogy, Luke says something of note. "I was born 90 seconds before Nell, but she will always be my big sister." Even in death, Nell is watching out for Luke. During Nell's funeral, Luke tries to say goodbye to his twin sister. Her ghost as the bent neck lady appears to warn him, saying don't. But before he can react, Olivia's ghost appears from the grave, holding him by the arm, pleading desperately for Luke to stay, and tries to drag him into the grave. This exchange is rather significant. We see Olivia, unhinged, desperately trying to literally and figuratively drag Luke into the grave, while a watchful Nell attempts to stop her mother. Nell looms over Luke, guarding him, ever watchful and ever present. Of course, Luke is in a panic about what he just saw. Steve tries to calm him and warns Luke about being vigilant. Steve believes that all the family is susceptible to mental illness, and they must remain cautious. Of course, even if this was mental illness, It isn't like people who suffer from mental illness can stave it off by just being vigilant. This exchange also sets in motion Luke's return to Hill House. Afterwards, Hue tries to comfort Luke, suggesting to him that seeing things is sometimes normal, and that it is okay that he might be experiencing some strange visions. Ultimately, Hue is trying to reach out to a very vulnerable Luke. Luke, however, throws Hue's line bitterly back at him. Big boys know what's real and what's imaginary. Isn't that right, Dad? Trying to pull himself together, Luke decides that he's had enough of Hill House. He steals Shirley's credit card and Theo's car and heads to Hill House alone. Luke has finally decided to stop running from his fears and goes to the house to face his fears and demons head on. Unfortunately, this is exactly what Hill House seems to want. As he approaches the house, it glows a warm, ominous red glow, signaling him a warm welcome home. Luke pours gasoline all over the foyer and throws his lighter to set the house ablaze. To his surprise, the flame dies out. Olivia appears on the split landing of the grand stairway. She beckons him to her, but before he can really react, Poppy Hill quickly grasps Luke's face. Luke is taken to the red room. The room gives him an alternate vision of what happened with Joey. Instead of abandoning him that night, she returns to find him and brings him to a nice, clean hotel room. This alternate Joey starts to try to seduce Luke. She begins by thanking him for saving her that night. Luke is obviously confused because that isn't what happened that night, but she's able to lull him into the dream narrative. She gestures him towards the bed and tries to flirt with him. She says she thinks that he may have come back to save her because he might be sweet on her. Again, this seems to appeal to Luke's more naive and childish nature, almost like how children or teens may flirt with each other. Very innocent and gentle flirtation. The sweet moment is cut abruptly short when Joey says that she has something for them. She pulls out what appears to be a small red bean-shaped heroin. Luke rejects it, insisting that he is clean. But she begins to taunt him and says that he'll never be clean. She says, "You have an appointment with that needle. You are expected." I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this is what I did with your money. I mean, Steve's money, let's be real. You're thinking that I put it in my arm, and I'm in some alley, and maybe I died there. In the puke, and the piss, and the alley rats are chewing on me right now. Little yellow teeth punching through the jelly of my pretty eyes, right? She asks him to come with her, to which he refuses. But she says, "Baby, you already did." This horrifies Luke as he finds a syringe in his arm. She continues, "Oh, Gordon was right. If you look long enough at the wallpaper, you can see that little girl. It's the girl with the runny egg eyes." Joey's eyes melts out of their sockets and runs down her face. This is a reference to a war veteran named Gordon, who told of his struggles with drugs when Luke was still at the rehab center. Gordon witnessed horrible things during his time in combat, one of which is a young Iraqi girl who was burnt to death. He describes her eyes and how her eyes had melted to look like runny egged eyes. This haunts Gordon and drives him to drugs. but the visions of the young girl with the melted eyes won't stop haunting him. So during one of his acid highs, he sees her in the wallpaper, so he decides to blind himself with the knitting needles, so he will never see her again. Of course, this just blinds him, and he still sees her in the darkness. He used drugs to escape from the little girl, but drugs just made certain he would never escape from her. Luke snaps back to reality. It seems like the needle in his arm is actually filled with rat poison. The poison starts to kill Luke, and his siblings try to save him, but it seems futile. As he seemingly dies, he has an out-of-body experience. Again, he's in the red room, except now Olivia's waiting for him with young Nell and Abigail. This is a recreation of the deadly tea party night, except now Luke is an adult and the room is painted white. Olivia is ecstatic that he's finally awake. It is clear that she's been waiting for him to come back to Hill House and is still very much under its influence. She asks him to wear his big boy hat, the bowler hat he liked so much as a boy. Abigail, Nell, and Olivia are wearing their own bowler hats. Luke initially rejects the hat, but a persistent Olivia continues to coax him. He seems to start to relent like he did with Joey's apparition. The young Nell tells him don't, and then tells him to go. This seems to break Olivia's influence, and Luke seems to start to understand what the bowler hat actually means. The hat becomes a symbolic tool used by the house to blur the lines between reality and imagination. The temptation is to take and to wear the hat, and to awaken within the house, where imagination and reality are merged. Hill House offers the false promise of awakening from a bad nightmare, but in reality, it only offers death. The victims of Hill House die only to wake as ghosts. They seem lost in their own afterlife, and seem unable or too oblivious to move on, losing themselves in the maze that is the house. Ironically, Luke rejecting the hat is him showing that he is now grown and can tell the difference between what is real and what is imaginary. He sees the hat for what it is and rejects the hat because he wants to live. As Olivia tries to comfort him by telling him that the drugs were not his fault, Luke rightly tells her no. He takes accountability for his past and refuses to be lulled by her. Upon this rejection, Nell's apparition is able to rescue him from the tea party, and Luke awakens in the red room. He's able to talk to Nell again, and he tells her, "I don't know how to do this without you." To which she responds, "There is no without. I am not gone. I am scattered into so many pieces, sprinkles on your life, like new snow." Luke is taken to the hospital and survives, waking in the hospital surrounded by his living family. In an ironic twist, Luke does die and awaken as Olivia intended, but he is saved by his siblings and rescued from Hill House. We last see Luke with his family, celebrating his second year of sobriety. Luke's story is about realization, redemption, and recovery. The childhood trauma he suffered led him to drugs as a form of escapism. Of course, this just led him on a path of self-destruction. He's only able to break his cycle of drug use through numerous tries. And while it seemed like insanity to Steve, Luke had to go through rehab countless times before he was able to move forward with his recovery on his own. Joey and Gordon act as cautionary tales for Luke a dark mirror for what his life was close to becoming. Luke was able to stop himself before he completely doomed himself. Of course, while his drug addiction is the main issue that Luke needed to survive, he also needed to contend with Hill House. He had to face his fears and traumas before he could ultimately move on with his life. He was given the choice between imagination and reality, and he chose reality, and he chose to live.